You don't need a lawyer, my son said, leaning against my kitchen counter with the same charming smile he used when he was 5. He had no idea I had 2 attorneys sitting in the den, listening to every word through the thin walls. He thought he was looking at a confused widow about to unknowingly shoulder his $300,000 debt. I just folded my trembling hands on the table and asked him to say it again. My name is Martha Ellison, and at 68 years old, I have learned that the quietest mornings often precede the loudest storms. I sat alone in the kitchen of my cedar-sided bungalow in Maple Ridge, a town where the mist clings to the pine trees until noon. My hands were wrapped around a mug of black coffee, the ceramic warm against my palms, grounding me in the present moment. The house made its usual sounds, the comforting groans of timber settling against the foundation and the specific, high-pitched creak of the floorboard near the pantry. The air still held the heavy, damp scent of the rain that had fallen throughout the night, a smell of wet earth and decaying leaves that always reminded me of Frank. His photographs were still on the mantel in the living room, dusted and straightened, watching over a life he had left behind 3 years ago. The front door opened without a knock. I did not flinch, though my grip on the mug tightened just enough to turn my knuckles white. Only one person entered my home with that kind of presumptuous weight, stepping onto the entryway rug as if he held the deed to the floor beneath it. Daniel, my only son. He did not come alone. The clicking of sharp heels on the hardwood announced Lydia before she even rounded the corner. My daughter-in-law swept into the kitchen, a cloud of expensive, cloying floral perfume announcing her presence before she said a word. She was dressed impeccably, wearing a sharp navy blazer and pearls that were far too formal for a casual weekend visit to an old woman in the woods. Her blonde hair was sprayed into an unmoving helmet of perfection, and she offered me a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile that looked like a crack in a porcelain plate. In her manicured hands, she clutched a thick, beige folder. "Morning?" "Mom," Daniel said, pulling out the chair opposite me. He did not kiss my cheek. He did not ask how I was doing. He sat with a heaviness that suggested a burden, though I suspected the only burden he carried was the weight of his own greed. Daniel looked tired, his hairline receding faster than it had last Christmas, but his eyes were bright with a manic sort of energy. Lydia took the seat beside him, placing the folder on the table between us with a deliberate, soft thud. It sounded like a gavel hitting a block. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He clasped his hands together and lowered his voice to a tone I recognized from his childhood. The voice he used when he was trying to hide a broken vase or a bad report card. It was a tone of practiced, suffocating gentleness. "Mom," he said, looking deep into my eyes. "You don't need a lawyer." I stared at him, my face a mask of mild confusion, while inside, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The irony was so sharp, it almost drew blood. The moment he said those words, confirming his guilt without realizing it, was the moment I knew for certain that I did not just need a lawyer. I needed an army. He had no idea that I had already hired 2 of the fiercest attorneys in the state, or that they were currently reviewing the fraudulent documents I had unearthed days ago. But to Daniel, I was just his aging mother, a woman he believed was slowly losing her grip on reality. I decided to give him exactly what he expected. "A lawyer?" I asked, letting my voice waver slightly, adding a tremor to my hand as I set the coffee mug down. "Why? Why would I need a lawyer?" "Danny, is something wrong?" Lydia exchanged a quick, triumphant glance with her husband. She opened the folder, spreading out papers covered in dense legal jargon and highlighted figures. Oh, no. Martha. Nothing is wrong, Lydia said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We just want to make sure you are protected. This is just a financial plan. You know, to ensure your golden years are comfortable. We handled all the complicated parts, so you wouldn't have to worry your poor head about it. It's just standard paperwork. Mom, Daniel added, sliding a pen toward me. We just need to tidy up some assets. You know how confusing these banks can be. I looked at the pen, then at the papers, feigning a struggle to focus my eyes. They were so confident. They saw a frail old woman in a cardigan, confused by the modern world. They did not see the auditor who had spent 35 years finding the missing cents in million-dollar ledgers. I see, I murmured, reaching out to touch a deep scratch in the oak table surface. It was a mark Frank had made years ago when he dropped a heavy toolbox, a permanent scar in the wood. I ran my thumb over the rough groove, using the sensation to anchor myself, to keep the rage from trembling through my fingers. I needed to let them talk. I needed them to dig their hole so deep they would never climb out. Well, I said softly, looking up at my son. If you say it's for the best. Danny. I touched the scratch again, feeling the grit of the wood, knowing this was the last moment of peace before I burned their house of cards to the ground. I looked at the glossy folder Lydia had placed on the table, but my mind drifted back through the decades, peeling away the layers of the woman they thought I was. They saw a pensioner who knitted scarves and watered ferns. They did not see the 35 years I spent as an internal auditor for Northwind Claims Services. I had made a career out of noticing what people tried to hide. I could smell fraud in the hesitation of a signature or the misalignment of a single digit in a column of thousands. I knew that numbers told stories, and usually they were stories of greed. There was a time when Daniel respected that about me, or at least he relied on it. When he was a boy, he would bring me his math homework, trusting me to find the errors he had missed. But as he grew into a man, that trust curdled into resentment. He began to view my attention to detail not as a skill, but as a judgment. Mom, stop analyzing everything, he would say when I asked about his credit card interest rates. You act like I'm one of your suspects. The dynamic shifted violently 3 years ago, the day Frank's heart stopped. When my husband died, the silence in this house became a physical weight. In the fog of that first month, Daniel stepped forward. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder and used a voice that sounded too big for the kitchen. Mom, don't worry, he had said, his eyes dry while mine were still weeping. I'll handle the finances for you. You just grieve. It started small. It always does. First, it was a request for $2,000 to cover a credit card bill he claimed was an oversight. Then it was $5,000 for an investment in a craft soda startup that he swore was the next big thing. Then it was a loan to help a friend with crushing medical debt. I wrote the checks. I was a mother grieving her husband, desperate to keep her son close. But the money never came back. When I asked, the excuses were elaborate and defensive. The market is volatile right now, Mom, he would say, or, I just need a little more time to liquidate the assets. Then Lydia began to tighten the screws. Her suggestions were always wrapped in concern, like a poisoned candy coating. Mom, at your age, maybe you shouldn't be driving that sedan, she suggested one Sunday. We could sell it, put the money in your account. For safety, Next, it was the small cabin by the lake. The maintenance is too much for you, Daniel argued. Sell it. Simplify. I resisted, and the calls became fewer. When I dialed Daniel's number, I was met with voicemails or hurried whispers. Can't talk. Mom, big project, or driving. Call you later? I became an obligation, a flashing red light on his phone screen that he wanted to swipe away. They did not know that I kept everything. In the closet of the spare bedroom, I had cardboard boxes labeled by year. Every receipt, every bank statement, every letter. Daniel had mocked this habit during Thanksgiving last year. It's hoarding. Mom? He had laughed, pouring himself a third glass of wine. You're obsessed with control because you have nothing else to do. You don't know how to enjoy your twilight years. I sat there, cutting my turkey, listening to them talk about me as if I were already gone. Well, Lydia had whispered to him, loud enough for me to hear. Who knows how many lucid years she has left anyway? We have to be realistic. That was the moment the coldness settled in my chest. Disrespect does not arrive like a thunderclap. It is not a sudden explosion that warns you to run. It is like a water leak behind a painted wall. It drips, slow and silent, rotting the beams and soaking the insulation while the surface looks perfectly fine. You only realize the house is ruining you when you put your hand against the wall and your fingers go right through the plaster. I looked up from the table, meeting Daniel's eyes. He was smiling that patient, condescending smile. He thought the wall was sound. He did not know I had already found the rot, and I was holding the sledgehammer. Lydia pushed the thick binder across the oak table until it rested just inches from my coffee mug. The cover was a soothing, sterile blue, the kind of colour designed to induce compliance in hospital waiting rooms. It is just standard long-term care planning. Martha, she said, her voice smooth. It limits legal exposure down the road. We want to make sure the state cannot take your assets if you ever need nursing care. Daniel nodded enthusiastically, leaning in. Exactly. Mum. Everyone at the Northview retirement community does this. We toured Northview Haven yesterday. It is like a resort. Heated pools, bingo nights, chef-prepared meals. You would love it. I kept my face blank, though my stomach churned. They were already trying to pack me away into a facility. And this paperwork, I asked, touching the plastic cover. It moves the deed of this house into a living trust, Daniel explained, throwing the term around with the confidence of someone who had just read a Wikipedia article. It stands in my name as the trustee, purely to avoid probate taxes. You still live here, obviously. It just streamlines the estate. Streamlines. That was a corporate word for firing people, and now it was a family word for eviction. I opened the binder. My eyes, trained by 35 years of auditing insurance claims, did not scan the glossy brochures at the front. I flipped immediately to the back, to the dense blocks of text in 8-point font where the real intentions always hid. I scanned the definitions until my finger stopped on a clause halfway down the penultimate page, irrevocable financial guardianship. My breath caught in my throat. This was not a simple living trust to avoid taxes. This was a total surrender of rights. If I signed this, Daniel would have absolute, permanent authority over every cent I owned and every medical decision concerning my body. I would be legally incapacitated by my own hand. It seems very thick, I said, turning the page to hide the trembling of my fingers. Oh, just sign anywhere on the bottom line, Lydia said, waving a hand dismissively. We can fill in the dates and the rest later. It is just a formality. Just a formality, I repeated slowly. I looked down at the signature page. There was a reference exhibit attached. A photocopy of a document I supposedly signed last year, included to verify my identity. I stared at the signature Martha Ellison. The M was sweeping and looped. The E was wide. I write with sharp, jagged strokes. My M is 2 peaks. My E is a slash. That signature was a forgery. It was a good attempt. But the pressure points were wrong. The person who signed that had hesitated on the upstroke of the L. Mum Daniel's voice was tight. We really need to get this filed before the fiscal quarter ends. I closed the binder, masking my discovery with a look of bewildered fatigue. I can't seem to focus today, I said, rubbing my temples. My eyes are so blurry. I think I need to wait until the morning light to read this properly. Daniel let out a sharp sigh, checking his watch. Mom? Come on. It is just a signature. We have a dinner reservation in 45 minutes. I know. Danny? But I just want to be sure I don't sign in the wrong spot, I said, feigning a tremor in my voice. Leave it here. I will look at it with my fresh glasses tomorrow. He looked at Lydia. She tightened her jaw but forced a smile. Fine, Daniel snapped, standing up. But I am coming by tomorrow at 9. Have it signed. They left with the same lack of ceremony with which they had arrived. The moment the front door clicked shut, the old woman act dropped from my shoulders like a heavy coat. I stood up, walked to the drawer where I kept my highlighters, and sat back down. I spent the next hour dissecting the document. I marked the guardianship clause in yellow. Then, in the appendix, I found something even more chilling. There was a reference to existing encumbrances. The document listed this house, my paid-off house, as collateral for a loan I had never authorized. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood up and walked to the pile of mail I had ignored for 3 days on the entryway console. I shuffled through the junk flyers until I found it. A white envelope from Cedar First Credit Union. I had assumed it was a solicitation for a credit card. Now, staring at the logo, I realized it was the smoking gun. I slid my thumb under the flap and tore it open. The air inside the Cedar First Credit Union smelled of carpet cleaner and stale coffee, a scent that immediately brought back memories of my decades in auditing. I walked to the counter, clutching the crumpled white envelope I had retrieved from the mailbox. My hands were steady, but inside, my stomach was a knot of cold iron. A young teller with bright pink fingernails looked up at me, smiling the way people smile at the elderly polite, loud, and dismissive. Good morning. How can I help you today? She chirped. I need a full history of my accounts, I said, my voice low and level, and I need the complete file on the loan referenced in this letter. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in a cubicle with a stack of printouts. My auditor's eyes scanned the columns of numbers, ignoring the noise of the lobby. It did not take long to find the hemorrhage. 2 years ago, a home equity line of credit had been opened in my name. The limit was $300,000. I traced the line with my finger. The balance was nearly maxed out. Ridgeway Outdoor Gear. I read the beneficiary name aloud, a whisper that felt like a curse. I had never heard of the company, but I knew exactly who was behind it. Daniel had mentioned a camping venture years ago, something he claimed he had abandoned because the market wasn't right. It turned out he hadn't abandoned it. He had simply funded it with the equity of my home. I turned to the signature page of the loan application. There it was, Martha Ellison. to an untrained eye. It looked authentic. But I saw the hesitation in the loop of the H. I saw the pressure point at the end of the N where the pen had rested too long. It was a forgery, and not even a particularly good one. I need to speak to the branch manager, I told the teller. Now. Mr. Dolan was a heavy-set man who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but in a glass-walled office with an upset old woman. He looked at the documents, then at me, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. Mrs. Ellison, surely you remember coming in? Mr. Dolan asked, tapping the paper. It says here the loan was finalized 24 months ago. Mr. Dolan, I said, leaning forward. Look at that signature. Look at the slant. I have banked here for 40 years. Pull my signature card from 1985. Pull the one from 2010. Does that look like my hand? He hesitated, pulling a file from his drawer to compare. The silence stretched, thick and tense. It does appear slightly different, he admitted, his face reddening. But the notes here. The loan officer noted that you were present. It says the borrower was a bit confused, but her son assisted with the explanation. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Borrower was confused. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to grip the arms of the chair. It wasn't just theft. It was a calculated assassination of my character. Daniel hadn't just stolen my money. He had planted a narrative of incompetence in my permanent record years before he tried to put me in a home. He had brought a woman here, perhaps an accomplice, perhaps just he himself doing the talking while I sat in the car oblivious and told the bank I was losing my mind so they wouldn't question the shaky signature. I was not confused. Mr. Dolan? I said, my voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. I was not there. If that is the case. Mrs. Ellison, this is a very serious accusation. Dolan stammered. We will need to open an internal fraud investigation. I can freeze the line of credit immediately. But surely you want to talk to your son first. It might be a misunderstanding. Freeze it, I commanded, and give me copies of everything, every note, every timestamp. I walked out of the bank into the blinding afternoon sun. My legs felt heavy, but not from age. I was shaking with a rage that burned hotter than anything I had ever felt. I thought of all the times Daniel had offered to check the mail for me. To save you the trip to the box. Mom, he would say. To make sure you don't get scammed by those fake charities. He wasn't protecting me from scammers. He was the scammer. I got into my car and sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. If I did nothing, I would lose the house. I would lose my autonomy. I would end up in a room at Northview Haven, staring at a wall, while Daniel and Lydia spent the last of my life's work. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out my old, leather-bound address book. The pages were yellowed, filled with names of people who were mostly dead now. But I remembered a bridge game 4 years ago. My friend Beatrice had talked about a nasty estate dispute and a lawyer who had been a shark in a cheap suit. I flipped to the letter R, Rowan and Keane, LLP. I dialed the number. I need to make an appointment. I said to the receptionist, I don't need a consultation. I need a war counsel. The office of Rowan and Keane, LLP was not located in a glass skyscraper downtown. It was tucked into the second floor of a converted brick warehouse on the edge of the business district, a place that smelled of burnt coffee, dry toner, and the dusty scent of old paper. It was not glamorous, but it felt functional. It felt like a place where work actually got done. I walked up to the reception desk, clutching my heavy tote bag against my chest. The receptionist, a young woman with bright red glasses, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you, ma'am?" she asked politely. "I need to hire counsel," I said, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "And I need 2 lawyers, not 1. She blinked, clearly surprised. 2 usually clients start with a consultation with 1 associate. My case is complicated," I replied. "I need someone who understands elder law, and I need someone who understands financial crimes. I am prepared to pay a retainer today." 10 minutes later, I was seated at a scuffed conference table. Across from me sat 2 women who looked like polar opposites. Olivia Rowan was in her 60s, with steel grey hair cut in a sensible bob, and eyes that looked like they had seen every trick a human being could pull. Jasmine Keane was much younger, perhaps early 30s, with a sharp suit and a laptop already open, her fingers hovering over the keys like a pianist waiting for the downbeat. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I reached into my bag and began laying out the documents, the forged HELOC application, the bank statements from Cedar First, the glossy brochure for Northview Haven, and the terrifying guardianship papers Daniel had tried to make me sign that morning. "My son is stealing from me," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, "and he's trying to put me away so he can finish the job." The room went silent as they picked up the papers. I watched them work. Olivia studied the guardianship draft, her frown deepening with every line she read. Jasmine went straight for the bank statements, her eyes darting across the columns of withdrawals. "This isn't just a bad loan," Jasmine said, tapping a line on the spreadsheet. "Look at these transfers. $50,000 here, $20,000 there. It is all going directly into an account for Ridgeway Outdoor Gear. Mrs. Ellison, did you authorize any investment in a camping equipment company?" "Never," I said. "He told me that business failed years ago. It didn't fail because of the market," Jasmine said, her voice hard. "It is failing because he is bleeding cash. He is using your home equity as a life support system for a corpse. And this guardianship paper, this is his exit strategy. Once the credit line runs dry, he needs the power to sell the house to cover the principal before the bank forecloses." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Hearing it laid out so clinically made it real in a way my own suspicions hadn't. Olivia took off her reading glasses and looked at me with a softness I hadn't expected. "Martha," she said gently, "this is textbook financial exploitation of an elder. It is a crime. In this state, we have specific statutes to protect people in your position. You are not just a mother having a family dispute. You are a victim of a predatory act." A lump formed in my throat. For months, Daniel and Lydia had made me feel small. They had made me feel like a nuisance, a burden, a confused old woman who needed to be managed. I thought I was just losing my grip, I whispered, staring at my hands. They kept telling me I was forgetting things. "That is part of the abuse," Olivia said firmly. "It is called gaslighting. They break you down so you don't fight back when they reach for your wallet." "So, what do we do?" I asked, looking between them. "Do I call the police?" "Not yet," Jasmine said, her eyes gleaming with a predatory focus of her own. "If you call the police now, he will claim it is a misunderstanding or that you are confused. We need to freeze him out first. We contact the bank's fraud department immediately. We lock down your credit. We file for a protective order." "But there is a catch," Olivia added, leaning forward. You cannot let him know you have hired us. Not yet. He needs to believe his plan is working. If he thinks you are compliant, he will get sloppy. He will say things and sign things that we can use to bury him. You want me to pretend I asked? I want you to be the confused old lady he thinks you are, Olivia said. Let him talk. Let him dig. I looked at these two women. They were strangers, yet they were looking at me with more respect and attentiveness than my own family had shown me in a decade. I wasn't invisible to them. I was a client. I was a priority. I can do that, I said, straightening my back. I have been an auditor for 35 years. I know how to gather evidence. Olivia smiled, and it was a genuine, warm expression. We are going to draft the protection papers today, she said. We will have them ready to file at a moment's notice. So, the next time your son stands in your kitchen and tells you that you don't need a lawyer, you call us. Jasmine finished, closing her laptop with a satisfying snap. We will be right behind you. The siege on my sanity began the very next day. Daniel started appearing at my house with a frequency that would have been touching if it wasn't so predatory. He no longer knocked. He simply walked in, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of disorder, a coffee cup left on the table, a pile of unopened junk mail, a slipper slightly out of place. Mom, are you sure you are managing? He asked one Tuesday, picking up a standard electric bill I had set aside to pay later. You seem a bit overwhelmed lately. Do you really want to worry about these deadlines? I looked at him, forcing a tired smile, while my hand instinctively checked the pocket of my cardigan where my phone sat. Recording app open. I think I can manage a light bill. Danny, I said softly. 2 days later. Lydia escalated the war. She arrived with a woman I did not know, a young professional carrying a clipboard and wearing a badge that read, Silver Line Outreach. Martha, this is Ms. Perkins, Lydia announced. Her voice pitched high and bright, like she was talking to a toddler. She is just here to have a nice little chat. You know, just to see how you are doing in this big old house all by yourself. Ms. Perkins sat down and offered a sympathetic smile. Hello? Mrs. Ellison. I am a social worker. I just want to ask a few simple questions. Can you tell me what year it is? I sat very still. They were trying to build a paper trail of incompetence. I looked at Ms. Perkins, then at Lydia, who was watching me with the eagerness of a vulture. It is 2025, I said clearly. And before we continue, Ms. Perkins, may I ask who authorized this assessment? I did not request it, and I have not signed a consent form for Silver Line Outreach to evaluate my medical or cognitive status. Under state law, a capacity assessment without patient consent requires a court order. Do you have one, Ms.? Perkins blinked, her pen hovering over her clipboard. She looked at Lydia, confused. Well, your daughter-in-law indicated that you were experiencing significant decline and needed immediate intervention. Ms. Perkins stammered. As you can see, I said, taking a sip of my tea. My daughter-in-law tends to exaggerate. I manage my own affairs. If you have no court order, I believe this interview is over. Lydia turned a shade of crimson I had never seen before. She ushered the social worker out, muttering apologies. But Daniel stayed behind. The moment the door closed, the mask of the concerned son slipped, revealing the desperate debtor beneath. Why do you have to be so difficult? Daniel snapped, pacing my kitchen floor. I am trying to help you. I have sacrificed so much for you over the years. And you, You treat me like an enemy. Sacrificed, I asked, leaning against the counter. What have you sacrificed? Daniel. Everything, he shouted, throwing his hands up. I have been carrying the weight of this family since Dad died. And you won't even trust me with a simple signature. You think I want to do this? You think I want to be stressed about money? I moved closer, keeping my voice low, pushing him just enough to break his composure. Is that why you needed the loan? Danny. The one the bank keeps sending letters about? He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes wild and cornered. I had to use the house to secure the guarantee, he hissed, his voice shaking. I had to use the house as collateral. Otherwise, the bank wouldn't have given me the loan Ridgeway needed the capital. But I was going to pay it back. I just need you to sign the trust papers so I can move the assets around and fix it before the balloon payment hits. My hand tightened around the phone in my pocket. There it was. The confession. I see, I said, letting the silence hang heavy between us. You did what you thought was right. He stormed out shortly after, thinking he had won an argument, unaware he had just lost the war. But the attacks didn't stop at my front door. By the weekend, my phone began to ping with messages from relatives I hadn't seen in years. Thinking of you, Martha. Daniel says you are having a hard time remembering things. Maybe let him handle the finances. It is safer. Aunt Martha. Please don't be stubborn. Daniel loves you. Do not push family away. Lydia was poisoning the well. She was painting a picture of a senile, obstinate old woman to ensure that when they finally made their move, no one would believe my side of the story. I did not reply to the texts. Instead, I drove to the clinic of Dr. Evans, my general practitioner for over 20 years. He conducted a full neurological exam at my request. When he handed me the letter certifying that I was of sound mind, fully capable of making legal and financial decisions, with zero evidence of dementia or cognitive impairment, I folded it like a shield. That night, I sat alone in my living room. The house was dark, save for the street lamp casting long shadows across the floor. I played the recording on my phone. I had to use the house as collateral. Daniel's voice filled the empty room, tinny and desperate. I listened to it 3 times. The first time, I felt a mother's heartbreak, a sharp, physical pain that my own flesh and blood could betray me so profoundly. The second time, I felt shame. But the third time, the heartbreak hardened into something cold and sharp. I was done being the victim. I turned off the phone and sat in the silence, no longer afraid of the dark, but ready to become the thing that Daniel should have feared all along. The conference room at Rowan and Keene had become my command center. The air was thick with the scent of laser-printed paper and the quiet hum of strategy. I sat at the head of the table, not as a victim, but as the architect of my own defense. We were building a fortress, one signature at a time. This is the new revocable living trust, Olivia said, sliding a document toward me. We are transferring the deed to your house and your primary savings accounts into this entity immediately. But here is the key difference from what Daniel wanted. The successor trustee is not a family member. It is a licensed, independent fiduciary company. Even if something happens to you tomorrow, Daniel cannot touch a single cent without their approval. I nodded, uncapping my pen, and he cannot fire them. He cannot even speak to them without a court order. Olivia confirmed. Next came the hard part, the last will and testament. For years, My will had been simple everything to my son. Now, I looked at the new draft. We had structured it carefully to avoid a lengthy probate battle. "We are leaving him a bequest of $100, Olivia explained, her voice devoid of sentiment. "If we leave him nothing, he can claim it was an oversight and contest the will. By leaving him a specific, small amount, we prove that you remembered him and chose to leave him behind." I felt a pang of old grief, sharp and quick, but I swallowed it down. "Do it," I said. "And the rest. The primary beneficiary is now Emily Ellison," Olivia said, "my granddaughter, Daniel's eldest, at 24. She was the only one who called me just to say hello, not to ask for a check." Jasmine walked in then, holding a fresh stack of evidence. Her face was grim. "We found something else." "Martha," Jasmine said, sitting down, "I have been digging into the digital footprint of that home equity line of credit. The bank's logs show that several transfer confirmations were sent to an email address, Martha Ellison, home@yahoo.com. Is that yours?" "I have used the same Yahoo account since 1998. I replied. "I don't even know how to set up a Gmail account." "Daniel does," Jasmine said. "He created a digital mask of you. He used this email to verify the transfers so the bank wouldn't call your landline. We have already sent a formal preservation letter to the service provider and a fraud notification to the bank's internal investigation unit. We are cornering him." "What about the cash in my savings?" I asked. "If he has my social security number, can't he try to access my personal accounts?" "Not anymore," Olivia said. "We are moving the bulk of your liquid assets today. We are opening a new account at a completely different bank in the name of the trust. We are cutting the lines. By tomorrow morning, if he tries to log in to your old accounts using whatever password he guessed, he will find them empty." I spent the next hour performing a surgical removal of my son from my life. I filled out forms for my doctors, the hospital system, and my life insurance policy, where the forms asked for emergency contact. I crossed out Daniel Ellison with a heavy, black ink stroke in his place. I wrote Emily Ellison and the number for the fiduciary firm. "I need to tell Emily," I said, looking up. "I cannot drag her into a war she doesn't know is happening." I met Emily that evening at my house. She looked so much like Frank, the same dark eyes, the same quiet demeanor. I laid the documents out on the coffee table. I didn't editorialize. I just showed her the forged signature and the fake email address. She read them in silence, her face paling. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling. He really did this. Dad did this. He thinks I am confused." I said softly. "He thinks I don't know. But I need you to know, Emily, because I am making you my beneficiary, it might put you in a difficult position with him." Emily looked at the papers, then at me. Her shock hardened into resolve. She reached out and took my hand. "He is stealing your life," she said, her grip tight. "I don't care if he gets mad. I am with you. Tell me what you need me to do." "Just be ready," I said. "And don't tell him yet." That was the hardest instruction. Olivia and Jasmine had been clear. We need him to feel safe for a few more days. Olivia had told me before I left the office. Let him think he is still in control. Let him text you. Let him pressure you. Every time he demands you sign that guardianship paper, he is digging his own grave with the evidence. Back in the kitchen. Alone again. I looked at the stack of countersigned documents on my table. The trust was funded. The will was signed. The bank was on notice. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like a prison Daniel was building around me. It felt like a fortress I had reclaimed. I picked up the pen one last time to initial the final page of the trust agreement. "Mr. Ellison," I whispered to the empty room. "You have no idea who you just messed with." I capped the pen. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for him to walk into it. The explosion happened at 9 in the morning, announced not by a bomb, but by the shrill, relentless ringing of my landline. I let it ring twice before picking up, pressing the record button on the handheld device I now kept next to the butter dish. "What did you do?" Daniel screamed before I could even say hello. "Mom, my cards are declined. The business account is frozen. The manager at Cedar First said there is a hold pending an internal review." "What did you say to them?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the ceramic warm my lip. "I only went to ask a few questions." "Danny?" I said, my voice deliberately trembling just a fraction. "I saw some numbers I didn't understand. The nice man at the bank." "Well, he seemed to think there were irregularities." "Irregularities." Daniel's voice cracked, high and thin with panic. "You are going to ruin me. Do you have any idea what this does to my liquidity? I have vendors waiting for payments. You have to call them back. Right now. You have to tell them it was a mistake." "But was it a mistake?" I asked softly. He hung up. 20 minutes later, his car screeched into my driveway. He didn't park so much as abandon the vehicle at a crooked angle. When he burst through the kitchen door, I saw that he had come alone. Lydia wasn't there to smooth his edges or whisper legal jargon in his ear. This was just Daniel, and he looked terrible. His eyes were rimmed with dark, bruised circles, and his shirt was buttoned wrong. He looked like a man who had been running for a long time and had just hit a wall. He slapped a stack of papers onto the table. "Sign this," he commanded, his chest heaving. "It is an affidavit of correction. It tells the bank that you authorized me to act as your agent 2 years ago, and that you simply forgot. It clears up the fraud flag. Sign it, Mum, or I lose everything." I picked up the document. My hands shook, but not from fear. I was vibrating with adrenaline. I put on my reading glasses and scanned the text. It was a clumsy document, likely downloaded from the internet and modified in a panic. But there, in paragraph 3, was the sentence I needed him to acknowledge. "Danny," I said, pointing to the paragraph. "This part here. It says, I, Martha Ellison, retroactively approve the signature affixed by my son, Daniel Ellison, acting as my proxy." "Does this mean you are admitting you signed my name?" "It means you gave me permission," he yelled, slamming his hand on the counter. "Don't play stupid with me, Mom. You always knew I was handling things. Just sign the damn paper. But I didn't know you signed as me," I said, looking up at him, my voice hardening. "And I certainly didn't know you pledged my house to save your failing camping store." He froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly gray. You ungrateful." He sputtered, leaning over me, his shadow falling across the table. "I have taken care of you since Dad died. I have visited you. I have managed your life. And this is how you repay me, by acting like a victim. You are cruel. Mom, you are a cruel, selfish old woman who cares more about her money than her own son's future." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap, but the quiet click of a lock falling into place. I stood up. I didn't use the table for support. I stood up straight, drawing myself up to my full height. "Get out," I said. Daniel blinked, stunned. "What I said, get out of my house," I repeated. And my voice was not the voice of a confused widow. It was the voice of the auditor who had stared down embezzlers and liars for 3 decades. "Do not raise your voice at me in the home my husband and I paid for. If you are not out of this kitchen in 10 seconds, I am calling the sheriff." "You wouldn't dare," he sneered, stepping closer. "You need me. Everything all right over there?" "Martha." The voice came from the open window. We both turned. Mr. Jenkins, my neighbor of 20 years, was standing on his porch, holding his garden shears. He was looking directly at Daniel with a hard, unblinking stare. I heard shouting. Mr. Jenkins called out, "Do you need me to come over?" Martha Daniel looked at Mr. Jenkins, then back at me. He saw the resolve in my eyes and the witness at the window. He grabbed the unsigned papers from the table, crushing them in his fist. "You are making a mistake," Daniel hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You are going to die alone in this house, and no one will care. I would rather die alone than live with a thief." I replied. He stormed out, the door slamming so hard the window panes rattled. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Jasmine. "Martha," she said, her voice brisk and professional. "We just got word. The bank's fraud unit has completed their preliminary review. Because of the amount involved, over $200,000, they are referring the file to the district attorney's office. This is no longer a civil dispute. It is a criminal investigation." I sat down, exhaling a breath I felt I had been holding for days. "He was just here," I told her. "He tried to make me sign a retroactive authorization." "Did you?" Jasmine asked sharply. "No," I said. "But I think I got him to admit on tape that he signed the original." "Good," she said. "Keep that recording safe. We will need it." My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily. She had sent a screenshot of a group chat with her cousins and aunts. "Dad is telling everyone you've lost it," the text read. "He says some shyster lawyers confused you, and now you are suing him for trying to help you. Aunt Sarah is saying we need to do an intervention." I looked at the message. A week ago. The thought of my family turning against me would have broken my heart. I would have cried. I would have begged for them to understand. But as I sat in the quiet kitchen, looking at the empty chair where my son had just wished me a lonely death, I realized I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them think I was the villain. I pulled out my notebook and began to write. I wrote down the time Daniel arrived. I wrote down exactly what he said about the signature. I wrote down Mr. Jenkins's appearance. I was not just an old woman writing in a diary. I was a witness compiling a dossier for the prosecution. And for the first time in a long time, my hand didn't shake at all. The room at the district attorney's office was smaller than I expected, with scuffed linoleum floors and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. I sat in a hard plastic chair, my hands folded tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. Olivia sat to my right, a silent, granite presence. Across from us, Assistant District Attorney Miller adjusted a digital recorder on the table. The red light blinked. A tiny, rhythmic heartbeat that seemed to count down the seconds of my son's freedom. I looked down at the paperwork in front of me. There was a box labeled "Suspect" inside that box. Typed in stark, black letters was the name Daniel James Ellison. Seeing it there, reduced to a procedural variable in a criminal investigation, hurt more than the theft itself. It felt like a death in the family. Mrs. Ellison, Mr. Miller said, his voice gentle but firm. I need to be very clear with you. We have enough evidence to pursue charges of forgery, grand larceny, and elder financial abuse. But these cases are difficult. Juries do not like sending children to prison for taking mum's money. They prefer to see it as a family squabble. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. If you have any hesitation, he continued, we can drop the criminal pursuit. You can handle this in civil court. It would keep his record clean. I looked at Olivia. She didn't nod or shake her head. She simply waited for me to do the math. And the math was brutal. If I handle this in civil court, I said, my voice sounding thin in the small room, that means the debt remains in my name until a judge says otherwise. It means the bank holds me responsible for the $300,000 while I spend years trying to collect from a son who has nothing left. That is a likely outcome. Yes, Mr. Miller admitted. I thought about Daniel. I thought about the way he had looked me in the eye and told me I was confused. I thought about Lydia, who worked as a care coordinator, managing the lives of vulnerable patients. If they could do this to his own mother, what would they do to a stranger with no family to protect them? It is not a squabble. Mr. Miller, I said, straightening my spine against the plastic chair. It is a crime. If a stranger had broken into my house and signed my name, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The fact that he came out of my body doesn't give him the right to destroy my life. So you are prepared to testify, he asked. I am, I replied. The next afternoon, Emily drove me to the county courthouse. The hearing was scheduled for the following morning, but Emily insisted we go early. You need to see the room. Grandma, she said as we walked through the metal detectors. You need to know where you are going to sit, so it doesn't feel so big when everyone is watching. The courtroom was empty. It smelled of wood polish and old dust. Emily led me to the prosecution table, then to the witness stand. I ran my hand over the wooden railing. I feel like I am going to be sick, I whispered, gripping the wood. You won't be, Emily said, standing beside me, her shoulder touching mine. You are just going to tell the truth, and I will be right there in the front row. You won't be alone. That night, my computer pinged with a notification. It was an email from Daniel. The subject line was simply, "Please read." I opened it. It was 2,000 words of desperation. He didn't apologize for the forgery. He didn't apologize for the lies. Instead, he wrote about the crushing pressure of the economy, about how the camping gear market had collapsed, and how Lydia had pushed him to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. Mum, I never meant to hurt you. The email read, I was just trying to fix things before you found out. I didn't want you to worry. The system is rigged against small business owners. If you go through with this, you are destroying my life over money. Is that who you are? Are you really going to let strangers put me in a cage? I called Olivia. She listened to me read the email aloud. It is a classic manipulation tactic. Martha, Olivia said, her voice tinny through the phone speaker. He is minimizing the crime and shifting the blame. He is blaming the economy. He is blaming his wife. He is blaming you for holding him accountable. But notice what is missing. He never says, I did not do it. Keep that email. It proves he knows exactly what he did. It is not an apology. It is a confession. I went to bed. But sleep was impossible. I wandered through my dark house, the floorboards groaning under my feet like old ghosts. I stopped in the hallway and looked at a framed photo from 30 years ago. In it, Daniel was 7 years old, wearing a plastic sheriff's badge and holding a toy radio. He used to run around the backyard, arresting imaginary bad guys. "I'm going to protect you. Mommy?" he used to shout. I touched the glass. That little boy was gone. He had died a long time ago, replaced by a man who saw me not as a person to protect, but as a resource to harvest. The grief hit me then, a wave of sorrow so profound, I had to lean against the wall to keep from sliding to the floor. I wasn't just going to court to save my house. I was going to court to bury my son. I went into the bathroom and turned on the harsh vanity light. I looked at my reflection. My face was lined, my eyes tired, but the confusion Daniel had tried to plant there was gone. I needed to say it. I needed to hear the words in the air before I could say them to a judge. I took a deep breath, staring into my own eyes. "My son is a criminal," I whispered. The words felt heavy, like stones falling from my mouth. My son tried to rob me," I said, louder this time. "And I am not going to let him." I turned off the light. The tears were still there, but my hands had stopped shaking. I was ready. The fluorescent lights of the county courtroom hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz. I sat sandwiched between Olivia and Jasmine, clutching a paper cup of lukewarm coffee as if it were a lifeline. Across the aisle, Daniel and Lydia sat with their attorney, a man with slicked-back hair who kept checking his watch. They looked exhausted, their faces drawn and pale, yet they still wore that maddening expression of aggrieved righteousness, as if they were the ones being persecuted. The hearing began, and Daniel's lawyer stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. "Your Honor," he began, his voice oozing false sympathy. "This is a tragedy, plain and simple. It is a misunderstanding within a loving family. Mrs. Ellison is getting older. She gave her son verbal permission to manage her assets hundreds of times. There is no written authorization because, well, does a son need a contract to help his mother? It was a good performance, but Jasmine was better." She stood up and didn't waste time with adjectives. She simply laid down the bricks of evidence, one heavy slab at a time. "Permission is not vague, Your Honor," Jasmine said sharply, "and it certainly does not look like this." She projected the images onto the court screen. First, the mismatched signatures, then the security footage from Cedar First Credit Union. It showed a woman standing at the counter, signing the loan documents. She was wearing a heavy scarf and large sunglasses. It was clearly not me. It wasn't even Lydia. It was a stranger they had hired to play the role of Martha Ellison. Then came the audio. Jasmine pressed play, and Daniel's voice filled the silent room. Tinny and desperate, I had to use the house as collateral. Otherwise, the bank wouldn't have given me the loan. Daniel flinched as his own voice betrayed him. When I was called to the stand, my legs felt heavy, but my mind was crystal clear. I sat in the witness chair and answered the prosecutor's questions. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply recounted the dates, the amounts, and the lies with the cold precision of the auditor I had been for 35 years. Daniel's lawyer tried to rattle me on cross-examination. He leaned in close, smiling that condescending smile I knew so well. "Mrs. Ellison?" he asked softly. Isn't it true that you have been forgetful lately? That you often misplace things, that you perhaps forgot you told Daniel to do this? I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded letter from Dr. Evans. I placed it on the ledge in front of me. I may be 68, sir, I said, looking past him to stare directly at my son. And I admit, I forget the times my son hugged me, simply because it has been so long since he did it without wanting money. But I remember very clearly the day he forged my signature. And I remember the day he told me I would die alone. The silence that followed was absolute. By the end of the session, the assistant district attorney recommended full prosecution for forgery and financial exploitation of an elderly person. The judge granted an immediate, permanent financial restraining order. Daniel was released on bail, but his assets were frozen, and the bank had already agreed to discharge the fraudulent debt from my name. 3 weeks later, the final scene played out exactly where it had begun. I was in my kitchen, brewing tea, when the back door opened. Daniel walked in. He was alone. Lydia was gone. Rumor had it she had moved back to her parents' house the moment the indictment came down. Daniel looked hollowed out, a ghost of the arrogant man who had stormed in here a month ago. He pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. He didn't look at the table. He looked at me with wet, red eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. I don't know what to do. The business is gone. Lydia left. I am facing jail time." I sipped my tea, waiting. He reached across the table, his hand trembling. "Can't we just stop this? Please, you can call the DA. Tell them you want to drop it. Mum, you don't need a lawyer for this. We just need to talk as a family." I set my cup down. The déjà vu was dizzying, but this time, the ending was mine to write. "You said that before," I said, offering him a thin, sad smile. "You said I didn't need a lawyer. I know, and I am sorry," he pleaded. "But really, right now, just us. You don't need them. Actually," I said. "Thank goodness I brought two." I nodded toward the hallway. Daniel spun around in his chair. Olivia and Jasmine stepped out of the den, just as they had weeks ago. This time, they weren't holding notebooks. Olivia placed a thick file on the table between us. "This is the permanent restraining order." "Daniel," Olivia said calmly, "and the civil suit for emotional damages. If you speak to your mother again without legal counsel present, you violate your bail conditions." Daniel stood up, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He looked at me one last time, searching for the mother who used to fix everything, the mother who used to pay the debts and hide the mistakes. She wasn't there. "I am not destroying you, Daniel," I said quietly. "I am letting you go. You have to fix your own life now, but you will never, ever touch mine again." He left without a word. The door clicked shut, and the silence that rushed back into the house wasn't heavy or lonely. It was peaceful. I walked out onto the back porch. The afternoon sun was warm on my face. I picked up the watering can and moved toward the planters I had neglected for weeks. The rosemary and lavender were dry, but they were still alive. They just needed a little care. I poured the water over the thirsty soil, watching it soak in, smelling the sharp, clean scent of the herbs rising in the air. I had spent my whole life auditing the books for others. But finally, the ledger was balanced. Thank you so much for listening to my story and sticking with me through this journey of justice and reclamation. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below, sharing your city or country. It is always amazing to see how far our family reaches. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who might need to hear it.